I will be checking them. So if people leave good replies in the chat room, I will respond. But I want to get through something for this late night philosophy session, and I'm going to do something that I haven't done before. So last week when I did meta atheism, I quoted copiously from a paper by a former professor of mine, Dr. George Ray, on his uh, paper Meta Atheism. Is one, when I read it 22, yeah, about 22, 20, I'm gonna say about 20, yeah, about 21, uh, yeah, and about 20 years ago, I read this paper of his, and it always, I found it fascinating, so I shared it with you guys. And I largely agreed with everything he said in that paper. So I pretty much just quoted verbatim from him just to make sure that I didn't give a straw man of what he was saying about what meta atheism was. If you're interested, check that previous live stream out because I have it up um, for replay if you guys want to see that previous broadcast. Um, Now, although I quoted copiously from his paper, I didn't I didn't go through it verbatim. I left a lot of stuff out. I gave my own little shtick to some of the stuff he said to put it in my terms. I want to do something different. So I'm a philosophy nerd and I love talking philosophy. And it might escape people exactly why there's so much value in philosophy, not just in the past, but today as well. I would say even more so today. And in doing so, I want to read a a selection from one of the greatest philosophers ever, Bertrand Russell. He was a British nobleman, okay, who became a one of the most important philosophers in analytic philosophy, nay, philosophy itself. And you know, he was one of the most important and prolific philosophers of the century, well, of last century, but still this century. So he wrote an interesting essay on the value of philosophy. So I'm gonna read this verbatim. Okay, this is something I've never done. So again, I want to say, so I'm gonna read his entire selection. It's very short, guys. It's very short. So it's something I wanted to do. Um, and because it's late, I really don't want to go a tit for tat with the chat room today. I'm gonna save that for later this week because later this week I'm gonna do a spicy live stream where I talk about the history of martial arts and why most of it is bullshit. But I want to do that early. So tonight, I'm going to read this. It's called The Value of Philosophy, and it's from the book, which I also own, called The Problems of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell, written in 1912. Yes, it's that old. So, with the, the Problems of Philosophy, like I said, although it was written in 1912, it's still often used as an introductory text in philosophy courses. In it, Russell claims that, philosophy is valuable not because it produces goods or knowledge, but rather because it can have a mind expanding and liberating effect upon those who study it. I think that's really important nowadays, especially in how people look upon college today as if it's just like is too often looked upon as just a more glorified version of a trade school. College was not meant to be trade school. And though I get it, yes, if you're spending so much money, you do want to major in something that will allow you to earn a living from it. I get that. However, ever, there has to be a trade off. I mean, there's going to be a trade off. Like, you can't expect both something to be directly applicable to a career unless you're going to a professional school, which usually comes after you leave college and do your undergrad degree, and you go into professional schools like medical school, law school, nursing school, stuff like that. Um, but on the undergrad level, I I think it's a mistake. Well, it's not a mistake, but it's not a mistake to pursue a degree that's going to directly translate to a good career. That's not a mistake. So don't think I'm saying that. What I'm saying is a mistake is how some people nowadays, especially in the manosphere and other places, see college having no worth beyond, you know, basically being applicable to a trade. So that is wrong. Okay, and this is why philosophy is still important. Also, philosophy is like one of those very few degrees that really actually teaches you how to think in college. A lot of them promise a lot of things, but there's very few college degrees that actually teach you how to think. The ones that really teach you how to think are either philosophy, math, and physics. Those are it. And then I'll throw in engineering because it teaches you how to be a it teaches you the most practical form of problem solving. So beyond those 4 degrees, yeah. And under engineering, of course, I'm using that as an umbrella term for all the different types of engineering degrees out there. But outside of those 4 things, so with all that being said, let me get into this. I agree mostly with what Russell says, but I'm not gonna say where I disagree right now. Okay, for any of you who may enjoy this, thank you in advance. Okay, and I'll do my best to speak articulately and not butcher this reading because this is the very first time I've ever done this, guys. So I hope you enjoy hearing me read. So let me get my water ready so my voice doesn't crack. Okay, appreciate it. And here we go. So, having now come to the end of our brief and very incomplete review of the problems of philosophy, it will be well to consider in conclusion what is the value of philosophy and why it ought to be studied. It is the more necessary to consider this question in view of the fact that many men, under the influence of science or of practical affairs, are inclined to doubt whether philosophy is anything better than innocent but useless, trifling, hair splitting distinctions and controversies on matters concerning which knowledge is impossible. This view of philosophy appears to result partly from a wrong conception of the ends of life, partly from a wrong conception of the kind of goods which philosophy strives to achieve. Physical science, through the medium of inventions, is useful to innumerable people who are wholly ignorant of it. Thus, the study of physical science is to be recommended not only or primarily because of the effect on the student, but rather because of the effect on mankind in general. Thus, utility does not belong to philosophy. If the study of philosophy has any value at all for others than students of philosophy, it must be only indirectly through its effects upon the lives of those who study it. It is in these effects, therefore, if anywhere, that the value of philosophy must be primarily sought. But further, if we are not to fail in our endeavor to determine the value of philosophy, we must first free our minds from the prejudices of what are wrongly called practical men. The practical man, as this word is often used, is one who recognizes only material needs, who realizes that men must have food for the body, but is oblivious of the necessity of providing food for the mind. If all men were well off, if poverty and disease had been reduced to their lowest possible point, there would still remain much to be done to produce a valuable society. And even in the existing world, the goods of the mind are at least as important as the goods of the body. It is exclusively among the goods of the mind that the value of philosophy is to be found, and only those who are not indifferent to these goods can be persuaded that the study of philosophy is not a waste of time. Philosophy, like all other studies, aims primarily at knowledge. The knowledge it aims at is the kind of knowledge which gives unity and system to the body of the sciences, and the kind which results from a critical examination of the grounds of our convictions, prejudices, and beliefs. But it cannot be maintained that philosophy has had any very great measures of success in its attempts to provide definite answers to its questions. If you ask a mathematician, a mineralogist, a historian, or any other man of learning what definite body of truths have been ascertained by his science, his answer will last as long as you're willing to listen. But if you put the same question to a philosopher, he will, if he is candid, have to confess that his study has not achieved positive results such as have been achieved by other sciences. It is true that this is partly accounted for by the fact that as soon as definite knowledge concerning any subject becomes possible, that subject ceases to be called philosophy and becomes a separate science. The whole study of the heavens, which now belongs to astronomy, was once included in philosophy. Newton's great work was called The Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. Similarly, the study of the human mind, which was a part of philosophy, has now been separated from philosophy and has become the science of psychology. Thus, to a great extent, the uncertainty of philosophy is more apparent than real. Those questions which are already capable of definite answers are placed in the sciences, while those only to which at present no definite answer can be given remain to form the residue which is called philosophy. This is, however, only part of the truth concerning the uncertainty of philosophy. There are many questions, and among them those that are of the profoundest interest to our spiritual life, which so far as we can see must remain insoluble to the human intellect unless its powers become of quite a different order from what they are now. Has the universe any unity of plan or purpose, or is it a fortuitous concourse of atoms? Is consciousness a permanent part of the universe, giving hope of indefinite growth and wisdom, or is it a transitory accident on a small planet on which life must ultimately become impossible? Are good and evil of importance to the universe or only to man? Such questions are asked by philosophy and variously answered by various philosophers. But it would seem that whether answers be otherwise discoverable or not, the answers suggested by philosophy are none of them demonstrably true. Yet, however slight may be the hope of discovering an answer, it is part of the business of philosophy to continue the consideration of such questions, to make us aware of their importance, to examine all their approaches to them, and to keep alive that speculative interest in the universe which is apt to be killed by confining ourselves to definitely ascertainable knowledge. Um, Many philosophers, it is true, have held that philosophy could establish the truth of certain answers to such fundamental questions. They have supposed that what is of most importance in religious beliefs could be proved by strict demonstration to be true. In order to judge of such attempts, it is necessary to take a survey of human knowledge and to form an opinion as to its methods and its limitations. On such a subject, it would be unwise to pronounce dogmatically, but if the investigations of our previous chapters have not led us astray, we shall be compelled to renounce the hope of finding philosophical proofs of religious beliefs. We cannot therefore include as part of the value of philosophy any definite set of answers to such questions. Hence, once more, the value of philosophy must not depend upon any supposed body of definitely ascertainable knowledge to be acquired by those who study it. The value of philosophy is, in fact, to be sought largely in its very uncertainty. The man who has no tincture of philosophy goes through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense, from the habitual beliefs of his age or his nation, and from convictions which have grown up in his mind without the cooperation of or consent of his deliberate reason. To such a man, the world tends to be definite, finite, obvious, common objects, rouse no questions, and unfamiliar possibilities are contemptuously rejected. As soon as we begin to philosophize, on the contrary, we find that even the most everyday things lead to problems to which only very incomplete answers can be given. Philosophy, though unable to tell us with certainty what is the true answer to the doubts which it raises, is able to suggest many possibilities which enlarge our thoughts and free them from the tyranny of custom. Thus, while diminishing our feeling of certainty as to what things are, it greatly increases our knowledge as to what they may be. It removes the somewhat arrogant dogmatism of those who have never traveled into the region of liberating doubt, and it keeps alive our sense of wonder by showing familiar things in an unfamiliar aspect. Apart from its utility in showing unsuspected possibilities, philosophy has a value, perhaps its chief value, through the greatness of the object which it contemplates and the freedom from narrow and personal aims resulting from this contemplation. The life of the instinctive man is shut up within the circle of his private interests. Family and friends may be included, but the outer world is not regarded except as it may help or hinder what comes within the circle of instinctive wishes. In such a life, there is something feverish and confined in comparison with which the philosophic life is calm and free. The private world of instinctive interest is a small one set in the midst of a great and powerful world which must, sooner or later, lay our private world in ruins. Unless we can no longer, excuse me, sorry, unless we can so enlarge our interests as to include the whole outer world, we remain like a garrison in a beleaguered fortress, knowing that the enemy prevents escape and that ultimate surrender is inevitable. Escape and that ultimate surrender is inevitable. So just going over that again. In such a life, there is no peace, but a constant strife between the insistence of desire and the powerlessness of will. In one way or another, if our life is to be great and free, we must escape this prison and this strife. One way of escape is by philosophic contemplation. Philosophic contemplation does not, in its widest survey, divide the universe into two hostile camps, friends and foes, helpful and hostile, good and bad. It views the whole impartially. Philosophic contemplation, when it is unalloyed, does not aim at proving the rest of the universe is akin to man. All acquisition of knowledge is an enlargement of the self, but this enlargement is best attained when it is not directly sought. It is best obtained when the desire for knowledge is alone operative by a study which does not wish in advance that its objects should have this or that character, but adapts the self to the characters which it finds in its objects. This enlargement of self is not obtained when taking the self as it is. We try to show that the world is so similar to the self that knowledge of it is possible without any admission to what seems alien. The desire to prove this is a form of self assertion, and like all self assertion, it is an obstacle to the growth of self which it desires and of which the self knows that it is capable. Self assertion in philosophic speculation, as elsewhere, views the world as a means to its own ends. Thus, it makes the world of less account than self, and the self sets bounds to the greatness of its goods. In contemplation, on the contrary, we start from the non self, and through its greatness, the boundaries of self are enlarged. Through the infinity of the universe, the mind which contemplates it achieves some share in infinity. For this reason, greatness of soul is not fostered by those philosophies which assimilate the universe to man. Knowledge is a form of union of self and not self. Like all union, it is impaired by dominion and therefore by any attempt to force the universe into conformity with what we find in ourselves. There is a widespread philosophical tendency towards the view which tells us that man is the measure of all things. I'm just reading the essay moment. I'll go over that afterwards. Um, that truth is man made, that space and time and the world of universals are properties of the mind, and that if there be anything not created by the mind, it is unknowable and of no account for us. This view is untrue, but in addition to being untrue, it has the effect of robbing philosophic contemplation of all that it gives it value, since it fetters contemplation to self. What it calls knowledge is not a union with the not self, but a set of prejudices, habits, and desires, making an impenetrable veil between us and the world beyond. The man who finds pleasure in such a theory of knowledge is like the man who never leaves the domestic circle for fear his word might not be law. The true philosophic contemplation, on the contrary, finds its satisfaction in every enlargement of the not self, in everything that magnifies the objects contemplated and thereby the subject contemplating, everything in contemplation that is personal or private, everything that depends upon habit, self interest, or desire distorts the object and hence impairs the union which the intellect seeks. By thus making a barrier between subject and object, such personal and private things become a prison to the intellect. The free intellect will see as God might see, without a here and now, without hopes and fears, without the trammels of customary beliefs and traditional prejudices, calmly, dispassionately in the sole and exclusive desire of knowledge, knowledge as impersonal, as purely contemplative as it is possible for man to attain. Hence, also, the free intellect would value more the abstract and universal knowledge into which the accidents of private history do not enter than the knowledge brought by the senses and dependent as such knowledge must be. Upon an exclusive and personal point of view and a body whose sense organs distort as much as they reveal, the mind which has become accustomed to the freedom and impartiality of philosophic contemplation will preserve something of the same freedom and impartiality in the world of action and emotion. It will view its purposes and desires as parts of the whole, with the absence of insistence that results from seeing them as infinitesimal fragments in a world of which all the rest is unaffected by any one man's deeds. Sorry. The impartiality, which in contemplation is the unalloyed desire for truth, is the very same quality of mind which in action is justice, and in emotion is that universal love which can be given to all, and not only to those who are judged useful or admirable. Thus, contemplation enlarges not only the objects of our thoughts, but also the objects of our actions and our affections. It makes us citizens of the universe, not only of one walled city at war with all the rest. In this citizenship of the universe consists man's true freedom and his liberation from the thraldom of narrow hopes and fears. Thus, to sum up our discussion of the value of philosophy, philosophy is to be studied not for the sake of any definite answers to its questions, since no definite answers can, as a rule, be known to be true, but rather for the sake of the questions themselves, because these questions enlarge our conception of what is possible, enrich our intellectual imagination, and diminish the dogmatic assurance which closes the mind against speculation. But above all, because through the greatness of the universe which philosophy contemplates, the mind also is rendered great and becomes capable of that union with the universe which constitutes its highest good. The end. All right, boys and girls, you can go to bed. No, I'm playing, but that's it. There's a short selection from The Problems of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell, written in 1912. It seems just as salient today in 2025 as when he wrote it in 1912. Like, basically all the same criticisms one would lob at philosophy today, they were saying over 100 years ago. Like, what use is this? This doesn't give us any knowledge that, you know, is, you know, pursuing something that is more practical is more useful than this hoity-toity contemplation and abstract thinking sort of stuff. So he answered those questions for the people with the criticisms, 113 years ago. But it's the same stuff that people raise today. And again, if you guys want to read the entire book, I have it here as well. It's called The Problems of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. And if you want to go into some other stuff, there's The Portable Nietzsche, um, the good book by Frederick Nietzsche. And that selection would be Philosophy and Power. Or you can read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by D. Suzuki. It's a uh, it's called A Classic of Meditation Literature on the Value of Not Thinking. So I want to answer what Moonlit asked me. So if the reason why it gives readings to Zen Mind and Portable Nietzsche is because Russell's touching on some stuff that Frederick Nietzsche had pointed out like probably 50 years prior to Bertrand Russell, and as well as stuff that's been talked about in Zen Buddhism, which I've talked about before when I mentioned Chan Buddhism or Zen Buddhism, when I mentioned Chinese philosophy. Um, like talking about this the self and the not self. So what is the not self? It is when you so the banal answer to that is when you're thinking about stuff outside of yourself. But that sounds, I know that's circular, right? When you're thinking of stuff not including yourself. I know that's circular. Um it's not a vicious circle, but I don't think it's very helpful to people. I think first we should answer what is the self, then we can get to what is the not self, right? So the self. So philosophy pointed this out before cognitive science figured this out like 100 years later. Cognitive science arrived at the same conclusion that they arrived at. There was some philosophers who arrived at much earlier, which is the self is an illusion. Free will and the self are probably the last two quasi spiritual beliefs that white people hold that are have no evidence for us to where we have like no reason to accept them outside of taking them on faith. Um, but even if we assume the self is the real thing, let's just assume it here for the sake of this argument. So the not self is thinking about all the things outside of what what pertains to our own like personal desires and needs and wants and like when you think about abstract stuff, when you go into philosophy or physics or math and you think about completely impractical abstract things like define what a moment in time is. um, what what is the universe comprised of? Um, what equation defines the fabric of the cosmos? This the thing. So what Bertrand Russell gets at, is saying when you think of stuff outside of your own personal interests, it it kind of enlarges you because so many because the universe is seemingly infinite itself. To just put your mind set to thinking of many of these aspects of the universe kind of greatens it in its own because it is connection to this seemingly infinite machine. And some people see the cosmos as a mechanic phenomenon. But anyway, um, it so that's basically what the not self means. It's something that you would probably hear talked about in something akin to Buddhism as well, which is why I said I would recommend people if they want to get more into this, they can read Zen Mind by uh, D. Suzuki, um, or they can read The Portable Nietzsche by Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, and you could read this entire um, you can read this entire book from which this selection came from, The Problems of Philosophy. It is a very good book, and it's clearly and cogently written. You really don't have to have a background in philosophy to read this book because it's actually used often as an introduction to philosophy. So the problems of philosophy is good for the layman and person who's just interested in knowing a little bit more about Western philosophy. It is a good introduction to it, which is probably one of the reasons why I had to read it as an undergrad. Melissa says this is a good thing, right? Isn't this in itself philosophy pondering everything in depth? Well, merely pondering stuff isn't philosophy. It's a beginning to it. Like I said before, like philosophy is actually like a systematic way of thinking, like science is. Like often people think philosophy is just merely speculative thought, and it's not. They often get very discouraged when they take philosophy and realize um, I can't just throw out random speculations. So in science, you're quickly disabused of that idea very quickly because in any science class, you usually have a hard nosed uh, science professor who will say, okay, yeah, that's cool or whatever, but how do you test that? How do you test that claim you just made? In philosophy, is a little bit different. They Whereas they might not say how do we test that claim, they will say, well, what reasons do you have to hold that belief? Because in philosophy, it doesn't matter how absurd the idea is. If you can reasonably define excuse me, if you can reasonably defend and justify that claim, you're on good footing. But it takes training to know how to defend and justify those claims. So this is why philosophy has a systematic way of doing things. And one of the found like the biggest foundation on which Western philosophy um, resides is through logic, particularly symbolic logic. Symbolic logic was the start of analytic philosophy. So merely pondering something isn't good enough. You're gonna have to like give reasons for the thoughts that you're that you're expressing. That is doing philosophy. So so just like I mean, so like I said, just like in behavioral and social sciences, you need to have a background in behavioral statistics and physics. You have to have a background in doing like higher uh higher level math such as like calculus, differential equations, linear algebra, those sorts of things. Um, and the hell if I can do that sort of stuff, I might attempt it one day. But beyond calculus, I don't know. And I'm talking about calculus one. I don't know. Like you get up into those higher levels, calculus two and three, and I had a pretty smart roommate, a Taiwanese guy, and even he was like, man, he said calculus two just fucking killed me. So, and that's basic for someone in physics or engineering. Like they're going way beyond it. They're going to be doing like calculus three, linear algebra, differential equations, uh, vector algebra. They'll probably have to do they'll probably have to do probability theory, but they're going to do like the higher level 400, like the upper class level probability, not the kind that I had to take, which was I took probability too, but I took probability as a prerequisite for doing statistics instead of taking calculus. I was like, well, it makes more sense to take probability as a prerequisite for doing statistics than taking calculus because probability is more akin to that. So that helped. Um, then before that, I did like basically just college level algebra, which is often called uh, let's call it finite mathematics. If you ever see finite mathematics, that's just basically college level algebra. It's a little bit of algebra, a little bit of trigonometry, a little bit of a little bit of analytic analytic geometry, all mixed in all mixed in twine. But in any case, so yeah, this, I just thought I would do this once. Um, I might do this again if people like it. I might read another philosophy selection. I don't know if my voice sounds horrible when I read these things, so that's and also like a lot of philosophy selections tend to be rather long for the average person uh, to keep their attention towards. So um, I'll look for like similar small selections if I do this again in the future. But that's it, guys. Plus, I didn't want to stay on too long because it's already late. But if people liked it, please give me a like. I see a few likes there. I appreciate it, guys. Give me a like and a subscribe. I appreciate that as well. Um, Coming up this week, I will be talking about the history of martial arts. It goes along with something I've been discussing for the past 2 years, which is called martial arts myths. So I find this very interesting. I think people will find this interesting. If people want to sort of kind of get prepared for what I'm going to talk about in that live stream where I talk about the history of martial arts, go to my go into my channel, and you'll see the different subcategories, and one you'll see martial arts myths. Under that, I have a bunch of selections, and you guys can watch those. And a lot of that a lot of stuff in those previous videos I'm gonna bring up in the live stream. And I'm gonna be pretty raw, and I'm prepared for the smoke, because this is something I've looked into for over 30 plus years of not only practicing philosophy but reading. Sorry, uh, uh, over 30 plus years of not only practicing martial arts but reading martial arts literature as well. So I'm not saying, well, I am a martial arts expert in a way, but in a unconventional way. So I'm gonna give some of my takes on that stuff. Hopefully people like it. I'm gonna do that earlier. That's why I didn't do it today, because I couldn't do it early. I didn't want to do it late. I want to do it early where I have more rational people that I can chat with in the chat room. Um, so that will be up sometime this week. I was gonna do it today, but I started too late, so I didn't want to do it at a late time where I couldn't trust the caliber of people in the chat room. Because let's face it, after midnight, mm-mm, not a good time. And yes, I did cut my hair. I'm not bald. People see my streams a million times and will always say, "Oh, you're going bald," and then disregard that I've had like 100 other videos up with me having a full head of hair, just not understanding that I cut it close because I like it like that, which is what she said. And that actually is what she said, but no, um, but no. In all seriousness, so yeah, hopefully you guys like that. Bertrand Russell again. Um, I should probably discuss who he is, because people's like, well, you keep bringing up Bertrand Russell. Who the is Bertrand Russell? So, and that's a fair question. So, let me just read this about Bertrand Russell, and this comes from a part of a textbook on perception, knowledge, and induction. By the way, if you guys want more tidbits that come that from which I'm getting information, I've mentioned this in a previous live stream, so I'm gonna mention it again. It's called "The Experience of Philosophy," the sixth edition by Daniel Kolak and Raymond Martin. One of those was a professor, was a professor at my university before he moved on to a different college. But when he wrote the earlier editions of the book, which I have the original, like one of the old editions, he co-wrote. That's when he was still part of our part of the department at my alma mater. So let me read who Bertrand Russell is, so you guys know who I'm talking. Whom I kept referencing, who wrote that selection earlier on on the problems of philosophy. So Bertrand Russell, born 1872, died 1970. A lot of these analytic philosophers tend to have a long life unless they deleted themselves, because unfortunately there is a strong connection between depression and people in academia, particularly in philosophy. But anyway, so he was one of the most important and prolific philosophers of this century. His early work focused on philosophy of logic and philosophy of mathematics, and includes the highly influential Principia Mathematica, published in 1910, which he wrote with Alfred North Whitehead. Russell then wrote on virtually every area of philosophy, including especially epistemology, or the theory of knowledge, on which he produced many books. The selection here is taken from two of these books. Russell was a great philosophical stylist, for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1950. A political activist, he was always at the center of controversy. He was once denied permission to teach a course on logic at City College of New York because of his liberal views on sex. He was jailed many times during World War One for his pacifism, and at the age of 89 for protesting against nuclear arms. In the following selection, well, we don't have to go into all that. So that's who Bertrand Russell is. It also fails to mention again he was a British nobleman. He was a earl, I don't know, third earl, second earl, whatever. But he never used his English titles um, as as part of his identity. He rather be known as a philosophy professor and logician and mathematician than as a British nobleman. So, but he was. So anyway, that's who the guy was, and I read his an entire selection of his from the Problems of Philosophy, talking about the value of philosophy. So I'm gone, guys. With that being said, so if you are interested, please give me a like and a subscribe and share the video once I upload it. But if you can subscribe and like the video, that does me such a huge benefit. Just subscribing to the channel and liking it and sharing it. That does me a huge favor. I'm already at 2,000 subs. I've already said by the end of this year I want to be at 10,000 subs. So that's my goal for this year. Last year, which I achieved last summer, I hit 1,000 subs. So I got so by the middle of the summer, I was able to get monetized. I hit 1,000 subs, and that's when I started showing my wife on camera. um, and I still have a video with her coming up. She's gonna talk about her trip throughout Indochina. She hit all the countries in Indochina, and hopefully she's gonna have a video for me to put up as well for her journey as well. But I plan to bring her on and have her talk about it. She was going to do it yesterday, and that was my fault. Um, I waited too long to work out, and she got hungry. And by the time she was ready to do it, I just thought it would be too late to have a good live chat with you guys. So be on the lookout for my live stream with Mrs. Contrarian talking about her Indochina vacation, and also be on the lookout for my live stream talking about the history of martial arts and why it's mostly bullshit. Spoiler alert. Um, and if you want to support me, you can do so through signing up for memberships, or you can leave me a super thanks, or you can go to the links in the description and you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. You'll see the link in the description, as well as a link to my Cash App or Venmo if you like. I've gotten a few Cash Apps, never got a Venmo though. I don't know why I even keep. Well, I just keep it because everyone has one, but I've never used it yet. But Cash App, yes. So feel free to donate to my cause. Like I said, as the channel gets bigger, I'm gonna put more production behind it. My friend Miss Needle has um, is a possible person that will be producing some of my content when I have the ability to put out that kind of content for you guys, like pre-recorded videos. So we'll see when that 10K subs. Until then, guys, thank you again for watching. If you have any questions about what I just read or your questions on the value of philosophy, leave it in the comment section. Okay, and I'll get to it. Other than that, I'll see you next time. Thank you, and thanks Moonlit for helping me out with the moderation. Appreciate it, brother. All right, guys. Good night or good day.